This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. This week I'll be talking with Juan Mah y Busch, who teaches at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, about Reinhard Kleist's biographical graphic novel, The Boxer, the true story of Holocaust survivor Harry Haft. Kleist does some interesting things in his comic storytelling. We'll be talking about some of those techniques, a thematic similarity between this book and Kleist's earlier book on Johnny Cash, and much more. But first, a reminder that this podcast needs your support. You can help by making your Amazon purchases through deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon. We get a cut of Amazon's profit, which helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of assembling this show every week. One thing you might want to buy through Amazon is Paul's book, Frank Miller's Daredevil and the Ends of Heroism. It was recently featured by both the Comics Journal and the Comics Reporter. Buy it on Amazon by going to deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and searching for Paul Young Daredevil. Okay, so I'm talking with Juan Mah y Busch down in the Los Angeles area. How are you?
Hey, doing well. Good to see you.
Yeah, we haven't talked in a while. You were on a couple years ago, a couple times, but yeah, we talked about the sculptor.
Right.
And yeah, I guess we haven't talked since then.
No, yeah, but it's good. It's good. This is a very different kind of comic, but it's good.
Yeah, so, just kind of anything new going on? You're still teaching at the university there.
I am. My teaching has actually shifted a little. I'm working a little more with first-year students and doing a lot more with writing and meditation, in fact. I don't know how much I was doing that before, but I have a couple classes the university approved that the students learn meditation, Vipassana meditation, in the first couple weeks, and then I use that to teach them how to do writing and university-level writing and stuff. So it's been interesting. It's kind of a new research path.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
You didn't expect that, did you?
No.
We read comics every so often inside of that context. So there's a few that seem to work and then put them next to novels and stuff. So the comics still find their way into my classes.
Okay. Well, yeah, this book is one that you could do some meditation on. This is The Boxer by Reinhard Kleist. And I've been wanting to get back to Kleist for a long time. It's been already 6 years ago that my brother and I did a review of I See a Darkness, the Johnny Cash bio that Reinhard Kleist did. So finally getting back to him, this book, The Boxer, came out 2 years ago. And it's another biography, a guy who survived the Holocaust. His birth name was Hertzko Haft, and when he moved to the U.S. after the war and became a professional boxer, he went by Harry Haft. And this book, like the first half is the Holocaust part of it, and the second half is going to America and boxing there. Of course, well, he actually boxed during the Holocaust too, which, yeah, the notes in the back talk about how the whole kind of sports on concentration camps bit has not really been studied much until recently. I hadn't even been aware of it. Did you?
No, I hadn't. I mean, yeah, no, not at all until this.
And yeah, I think it mentioned also that some prisoners were made to play soccer.
You know, what it reminded me of when I was reading that was, I don't know if you remember in the 80s, there's a Sylvester Stallone movie called Victory. But I think it's actually World War I, not World War II. But I wonder how many stories there are where, like in kind of concentration prison camps, they have sports basically for entertainment, but you know, it takes on kind of possibly a more sinister spin when you have prisoners fighting other prisoners in order to entertain guards and stuff.
Well, and the loser's taken out and shot.
Right. Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah. Well, I think the notes mentioned that part of the purpose of it was to keep the prisoners in shape in order to do the work that they were being made to do.
Yeah, but it seems odd, like if you have two athletic prisoners, you would kill off one of them. Like, it's sort of, it doesn't quite make sense. Like, I get that, like, you want to strengthen them and stuff, but it doesn't ring true because you're killing off 50% of the sufficiently athletic bodies that could be a labor force.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I guess a lot of them, including Haft, had not really had any experience boxing. And when you see him boxing in the concentration camp, his opponent is barely alive when he steps into the ring.
Right.
So that guy wasn't in very good shape.
It seems almost like I wonder if there was some sort of there's so much going on inside of this book in terms of memory. Like, I think there was a 50-year period that he didn't talk to anybody about these experiences, and then he kind of opened up about the experiences, and some people disputed the historical facts, etc. So a lot of this is not just like there's facts there, but it's also swimming inside of the character's memory. I wonder if there was this kind of build-up, right? So they have they test him. So, okay, here's these people that are half dead. Let's see how it goes. That character, Schneider, clear was
who was an officer of the Germans.
Right. I mean, it was his interest to not have Haft die immediately. So he probably, wanted to set it up like a good manager might do or something like that. And then as it built up, then he got that one Frenchman.
Yeah, who I guess he said it was the first opponent who actually knew something about boxing.
Right. And then after that, he seems to be more of a boxer. Like, at that point, he's boxing actual boxers and seems to be a boxer himself.
Mm-hmm. Now, I have not read a lot of accounts of the Holocaust. I mean, some, but you mentioned when I invited you to discuss this with me that you had just recently read another one.
It wasn't a comic; it was a novel. But I think a lot of what I've noticed in a couple different ones that I've either read or kind of skimmed through was the way that this is framed, the way the comic is framed, where you have him talking to his son. And it's from that perspective, and then the whole story kind of happens, and then it's kind of this framed once again by his son's narration at the end.
Yeah, it kind of repeats that same scene with different panels, different angles.
Right. I think a lot of what I notice in just the very little kind of Holocaust literature that I've read is the ways in which it talks about how the next generation inherits the ghosts of the Holocaust. And I think that a lot of especially what's being written now, because so much of it is being written by children or grandchildren of survivors, that there's a lot of it about the emotional inheritance of the Holocaust. And when this opens, that was very much the framing of it. I sort of, when I start reading a book, I don't like to have a lot of background information on the artist or on the story itself. I kind of like to see how the narrative unfolds. And as soon as I read the first 3 pages, I was like, oh yeah, it's fitting inside of that narrative structure. It was interesting to see that, the artist is German, I believe. And it's my understanding, not Jewish, not Jewish German.
Not as far as I know, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not certain about it. And so there were a couple little things that gave it a different feel after the fact. But that was kind of what I was commenting on when we first talked.
I see. Now, of course, I've read some Holocaust accounts, but I don't know. Reading this, you really kind of get a sense of what it's like to actually go through that. It really kind of puts you right in the situation. I felt like. And it just seems like the situation just keeps getting worse and worse and worse, and he thinks it can't get any worse than this, and then he says how wrong I was, and it just gets worse from there. Because first, the Nazis invade Poland where he lives, and he's just he would have been 14 when the invasion happened, and then he gets dragged off to a work camp, and then he finds that his family has all been taken from their homes and probably dead, and then he gets moved to a different camp, and he has to throw dead bodies in ovens, and it gets even worse after that. What I noticed, too, in the really kind of dark, shocking scenes, Kleist's art intentionally gets a little kind of messier or more kind of abstract.
Cloudy. In fact, it's actual clouds at times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the body burning scene, you just see kind of the silhouettes of these little carts full of sbodies, and which is plenty. You get the idea, and then he will just put in like these big splotches of ink as background, or then there's the smoke, of course. But it's something interesting that that comics can do. That you could do something like that in a movie, but I think it would be a little more challenging. In movies, things tend to look really real and not abstract. Yeah. And sometimes it's a little too much, where here you get the idea and you can be sufficiently shocked by it, but it's not overwhelming.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's a couple things I think that the comic book form lets him do. I mean, the shift in perspective from the son to him, I guess you could pull off in a movie, but it would probably feel a little clunkier than it does here, where I think what he does at the end is he has a blank page. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of takes a couple moments back, and you kind of repeat a couple lines of dialogue, and then you realize you're with the son's perspective once again. In a movie, that would probably feel like a little strange of a shift. And the same thing in what you're describing. I think that move from the more realistic drawing to the more abstract, where the artist really does save us a little bit. And he even says it in one interview, at the point where Haft he murders people after he
escapes, yeah.
And he murders people. Apparently there were a series of murders.
Yeah, we see 3. Mm-hmm.
Right. We get saved from one of the apparently more brutal ones. And so it feels like it's very conscious choice on the artist's part to give us enough to feel it, but to not really work us over as a reader. Yeah. Mm-hmm. If there was anything, if I could just add to that in terms of, what we as readers feel, one of the things that maybe was a slight disappointment to me, because it was the way in which you go through the man's life with such speed, the various episodes of his life you go through with such speed. I mean, I think altogether it's 180 pages. At some point, I almost would have liked to fall into one or two of the moments a little bit more fully. I don't know how you would pull it off. I mean, there was a lot to tell. There was definitely a lot of story to tell, a lot of episodes to get through. It sort of seems structured, right? It's got 2 narratives. And in fact, there's this one interview I read, the artist was very clear of there's 2 narratives that are going on. And it seems as if the 2 narratives are surviving the Holocaust and then a love story. And I feel like I got it, but I almost got it partly because I'm already aware of the atrocities of the Holocaust, and partly, like, it was almost, I didn't quite get enough from the comic, but what I didn't get from the comic, I was able to fill in from just the cultural memory of, oh yes, this is really bad, this is going on. And maybe that's what the artist was going for, but there were moments where I kind of wished, slow down, give me 5 pages of falling in love so that I can really feel the impact of that love. Give me 5 pages of that moment of escape, or something where I could really hold on to it a little bit longer.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Those points of the story were pretty blink and you'll miss it.
Right, right.
You know, because he missed Leah all through the book, but you know, you see that one quick love scene of them on a riverbank or something,
Right.
and they're going to get married, and
Right.
you don't quite get what he's feeling for her there. I think. I mean, do they really know each other?
Right, and that holds him to survive. I mean, that's meant to be kind of that. Repeatedly, he kind of is trying to, you know, there's moments in the comic where he says, to just feel her hand on my hand once again. Well, I get it. I understand what he's saying, but it feels a little too abstract. I didn't kind of feel the full force of that love. So I probably would have liked a little more of that to be worked through in the comic itself.
Coming up, more examples of Kleist's very effective uses of comics tools, the common thread between I See a Darkness and The Boxer, and more. But first, if you value the content on Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Bat Poles, if these shows have helped you get a new perspective on something or to discover something new, help us keep going with a monthly donation via Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. If you pledge at least $3 a month, you'll be able to access additional content on Patreon, including a video of my entire conversation with Juan about The Boxer. Also at the $3 level, we'll include an ad for your comic in the show once a month. Like John Alley, he's currently working on a comic called The Non-Scene, which we discussed in the June 29, 2015 episode of Critiquing Comics. John writes, it's a story about a girl who learns to see invisible creatures by reading a mysterious book, more or less suitable for all ages. Find it at airbornecactus.com/comics. And see all our donation levels and rewards at patreon.com/deconcomics.
I'm Batman.
And I'm Robin.
This is Tim.
And this is Paul.
To the Bat Poles! The iTunes reviews are in on To the Bat Poles podcast. These guys do a good job, writes Acello. Who knew that the Batman TV show was such a wellspring of insight into Hollywood trivia, 60s counterculture, sexual mores, and even musical analysis? The Young brothers know their stuff, says Professor Allen. It is a great mix of nostalgia, analysis, and fun. Highly recommended. You've heard the reviews, now try it for yourself. New episodes on the first, third, and fifth Thursdays of the month on iTunes or Stitcher, or at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com.
Batman, Batman, the answer to a policeman's prayer.
For nostalgia, analysis, and fun, it's
To the Bat Poles.
So he has been in this work camp, and he befriends a foreman who gives him some extra privileges, helps him. Like one of the foreman's girlfriends, one of his several girlfriends, the Jews are not allowed to exchange mail, but he can't read and write, but she writes letters for him and has them mailed to a non-Jewish friend of his family, and they're able to communicate for a while. And then the foreman is going to take him actually home so that he can talk to his brother about the smuggling operation. But when they get back, like, everybody's being dragged away by the Nazis. Yeah. And a couple things about that scene stood out to me. One was, and it's really cartoony, but it really works. The panel at the bottom of page 42 where you can see their car in the background and people being loaded onto the truck in the foreground, and they're just those little surprise lines over the car that, you know, that tell us, like, how surprised he is at seeing what's happening. You know, without those little lines, it wouldn't be nearly as effective of a panel. You can't even see his face; it's too far away. But those little surprise lines.
That's a great point.
It's just like a Mickey Mouse comic, but it works.
Yeah. No, that's a really rough scene. I mean, there's the moment with the baby and stuff.
Yeah, that was the other thing. Just the brutality of that scene really hits home, too. Like just tossing a baby here, catch, and it bounces off the side of the truck, and then they shoot the baby.
Right. I mean, certainly, you know, my previous comment was that we don't feel enough in certain moments, but there's other moments where I think the artist was right on. I mean, I felt enough there. I didn't need to dwell too much on that. I really like your point about those lines because it totally makes that panel. Mm-hmm. Without that, it's just kind of a shot of what's happening, but with that, it's actually includes his emotional response to what's happening, and that's kind of nice.
Yeah, and they're not even very overstated. They're not very long lines, but and it would be too much if they were really long, obvious lines. But they're just kind of subtle, and they really add to the emotion of the panel.
Yeah, and there's something nice about it too, because just to set the scene, we can't even see the faces of the characters inside the car. It's the entire car that has those surprise lines over it, and it seems appropriate because they're kind of just coming around the corner. They're kind of driving through the city. They realize the city has been attacked or struck, and then they come around this corner, and it's kind of like the whole car pauses and is surprised or something. So it does work well. It's nice.
Yeah, I really like that part.
I also think, even though it almost felt a touch clunky the way at the very end, and this is, again, just kind of the comic book form and stuff, the way we get this blank page. Isn't it the blank page that gets us back to, with that blank page at 171, and then it repeats a couple of lines of dialogue, but now the narrative focus is the son once again, and now it's kind of being told through the son. What works so well about that is this is right at the moment, this is, we can talk about the end of the comic, spoil alert, but it's right at the moment where the father is going to actually make contact with Leia once again.
Yeah, and so we're as puzzled as the son is by their sudden trip to Miami.
Right.
Because we don't know what Harry knows.
So what works, to me, that's exactly it. What works really well is, this whole story is told in the first person, presumably the father telling his son or kind of relaying this story. And so what we're getting is all of this emotional content. Well, I felt this, I did this, I was worried about that. And we're being filled in with kind of what he remembers of what he was feeling. And then right at this moment where he's going to reconnect with Leia, we lose all of that emotional content of the primary character. And it's being told from the son. And from the son's perspective, he's never fully grasped his father. He's always been frustrated by the abusiveness, that he's not very connected to the family emotionally and all of this stuff. And so right at the moment where we're going to get the major kind of emotional connection of the story, we once again go back to the character who's frustrated that he just doesn't understand the interior life of his father. I thought that worked really well. It was a touch clunky, the transition, but once we get there, it was really nice to kind of have the reader discover with the son, oh, he finally found her. He's finally kind of encountering her. And we, too, are able to kind of poetically not know the fullness of what's going on inside of that moment for the father. And they kind of, he and Leia walk down into the garden. They walk out of the house and into the garden. And we, the reader, along with the son, are kind of left in the house looking at them in the slight distance. And it's just really nice. I think if the artist tried to actually describe that with words, or if it tried to be still in the first person, I don't know how you would write that. I mean, how do you write the fullness of that moment and everything that must have been felt by those two characters? But by putting us in the son's eyes, I felt so much more of it because it wasn't put into words. It wasn't put into a simple image. And I really like that. I thought that was something that the comic was able to handle that I'm not sure a word-based novel could handle. I don't know how a movie would quite do it. The transition would be a little clunky. And I sort of liked that. I thought that worked.
Yeah, well, I suppose he did that because his son's account is all we really have. So that Miami scene at the very beginning of the book, it says it's September 1963. And at the end of the book, when we're back in Miami in 63, the son says, it took another 40 years until my father finally told me his life story. So the mid-2000s. And then the son, Alan, wrote it up as a book. So we have his son's account of what the father said, but, it's not the father is not describing it directly to us. Right. There's that kind of gap there. There's a what's the word I want? It's a little bit of a game of telephone. You know, we're getting it secondhand.
Well,
So-
and we've seen it before, right? Heart of Darkness. There's a whole bunch of books that have this kind of layered narration, and this one has it's not only layered because we're getting the father's story told by the son, but like we've said a couple times now, that whole gap of memory. I mean, there's a huge space of 40, 50 years. And so what we're getting in the end is not memories that might be factually perfect. What we're getting is kind of an emotional chronology of from the father of how this occurred and what impacted him after 40 years. We're really getting maybe the emotional ghosts of what impacted him, what has stayed with him for 40 or 50 years, rather than this kind of documentary style, fact-based analysis of what he went through.
Yeah, well, the notes mention that too. It's billed as a report by Martin Krauss. And it says, in 2006, and at the age of 78, some 6 decades after his experiences in German camps, he revealed his story to his son, who documented the events of his father's life for all to read. Although some details on closer inspection are historically incorrect or at least dubious, the conclusion drawn by the publisher Bernd M. Meyer hits the nail on the head. This changes nothing about the truthfulness and forcefulness of his experience.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the emotional thing that's the story here, I think.
And I think we often see this, I think because we call it a biography and we call it truth, that our minds kind of quickly want it to be factual. But we see the same thing when we see fiction and we read fiction and say, wow, there was a lot of truth value in that fiction. We're not talking about the kind of the details of the story never happened on this planet, but fiction is just structured in such a way that emotionally or in terms of the social structures of our world, it is very truthful. And I think that's what this does, right? It's not necessarily like for somebody to get too caught up in, well, what was the order of events that had happened or where was this and that, I think would be the wrong way to approach the comic. But when you approach the comic that way, in terms of the emotional structure of it and what really impacted this character, it feels very truthful. It feels, I mean, once again, just kind of, I just can't imagine. I don't know who I would be inside of one of these moments, and he's repeatedly reminding the characters around him. I mean, he's a very willful, tough person, not very sympathetic, not a terribly likable character, but he's just got this force of will to survive, that whether it's his brother that's with him in the moment or it's that other guy, this kind of chosen brother that he picks in the one camp that they promise to take care of one another. He's always telling them, hey, we just got to survive. We just got to do this. And it's raining at one point, and everybody else in the line is just kind of downtrodden, head down. And he and his chosen brother in that moment have their heads up and their mouths opened, and they're drinking in the rainwater. Right? He just has this incredible kind of determination to survive. And he keeps telling the people around him, almost for his own survival, he's telling them, hey, we have to survive. We have to push through. We have to push through. That to me is it's amazing, and it's part of kind of it's the whole boxing narrative. It's kind of what keeps pushing him through it. It's wildly amazing to me, and always makes me wonder who I would be in that kind of a moment.
Yeah, I mean, you can see that he and others did pretty much anything they had to survive, and we mentioned the murders. The morality of it goes out the window. You're just trying to make it, and that's after he escapes. But he's not sure who he can trust at that point. He doesn't know that the war is ended. And
in fact, the guy that he kills, he doesn't kill him right away. He takes the food and he sleeps in their bed, but the guy starts asking questions and starts wanting to know, who are you?
Yeah, because he's dressed in that SS uniform that he stole from the other guy he killed. Right.
And the questions unnerve him, and so then he doesn't even hesitate. And I'm not sure I would either. After everything I've gone through, there's no way I'm taking a chance of going back, I would imagine. Because he doesn't even hesitate. He's like, there's not a thought in his mind what he's going to do in order to get out of that situation.
Mm-hmm. And then
go ahead.
Well, when we see him later, when he's in that boxing gym in Harlem, and some black guys are kind of harassing him, he doesn't even care. I've been through so much worse than this.
Yeah,
You know,
and in fact,
whatever.
the line is something exactly like that. The line is something like, after what I've been through in the past, years or something like that, I don't care what they say.
Yeah, I just ignored their comments. They couldn't scare me, not after what I had lived through in Europe.
Yeah, and it's a great phrase because it puts things into perspective a bit. Like, come on, give me a break.
Yes. Yeah, we haven't really talked about the boxing part of it very much. But yeah,
Sure.
he moves to New York. Well, he's got an uncle there, so somebody who can kind of vouch for him immigrating into the U.S. So he stays with the uncle for a while, and then he is attracted to trying boxing because since he has that kind of on his resume, and ends up in a fight with Rocky Marciano.
Yeah.
Who's, I mean, I know his name. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. But so it's, he kind of enters into American sports history there a bit. Now, one point there that's left kind of vague. So the son points out that he always tells people that the fight was fixed and he had to take a dive. Right. And it's not, I think the notes in the back say it's not absolutely clear that that's what happened. And in fact, did you notice, so that they tell him about this other boxer who didn't listen to them and now he's dead.
Right.
Was it Vince Foster? And then after the fight, we see the newsboy saying Vince Foster killed in a car accident.
Right.
So they were just kind of saying facts that weren't actually connected to each other.
Well, and I mean,
us,
it's possible that he was killed in the car accident. Like, it almost felt like you could read it either way when you could.
They could have done something to his car.
Right. And there's also a note at some point that although they don't have evidence that he had to fix the fight, they did find the person he named was part of the entourage of Marciano. And so, I mean, they sort of, it's possible that it actually happened. It's just unclear because it's only his memory that they have of it. The boxing part was interesting. It's funny that you say we haven't talked about the boxing yet, and it's called, in English, it's called The Boxer. It's almost like if this were fiction, the boxing portion of the narrative would have worked in more tightly into the rest of it. What it felt like here was we only know this character really because of the boxing. And the boxing had something to do with him surviving. But even in the end, when he says repeatedly, if I become famous enough as a boxer, Leia will be able to find me. And so it's almost like when I started reading that, I was like, this really over-anticipates the ending of the story. And I was kind of reading it, and I was like, oh, wow. I mean, if this was fiction, I would have never done that. But in the end, that's not what linked him up with Leia. And so it was kind of interesting because though there's this kind of build-up and him trying to become a better and better fighter just in the hopes that she'll read a newspaper somewhere, and it doesn't happen. Like, the boxing doesn't happen. In the end, he goes down in the 4th round. Apparently, he's not famous enough for Leia to read something in the newspaper. And another couple decades go by before he finds her through, it was some sort of Holocaust survivor network or something that gave her name.
Yeah.
So it was the boxing portion of it. Like, what do you make of it? Like, how did it fit into the overall story, and how crucial was it to the story for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, and you're right about the whole anticipation it kind of builds up because, if this was some kind of, gauzy Hollywood movie, fiction thing, then he would, she would find him because of his becoming a boxer, and they would get married, and he would beat Rocky, and
right. All of these great things, right?
And so, but you're thinking, this is a true story, so it's probably not all going to come together as nicely as that.
Yeah.
And he does find her eventually, but the rest of it doesn't pan out. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, the first part of it feels like more the heart of it, the Holocaust thing. I mean, I feel like he's a Holocaust survivor first and a boxer second.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I can't remember if in German, like in English, we have the boxer, and the subtitle is The True Story of Holocaust Survivor Harry Haft. I can't remember the title of the book in its original German.
Yeah, Der Boxer, Die wahre Geschichte des Hertzko Haft. My German is pretty rusty. Wahre Geschichte. So, because there were a couple of this artist's comics that inverted the two, but I guess not here. Because I agree with you. I think he's a Holocaust survivor first, almost a lover second, and then the boxer part. It's almost like the boxer part is why we know he exists at all. Like we sort of, otherwise he's just one of thousands. That's the hook to hang the story on.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, there are lots and lots of people like him who survived the Holocaust and came to the U.S. afterwards, who maybe did less notable, things that didn't get in the paper at all after they got here. But he has a little bit of a claim to fame in the States. So
right, yeah, I think that's kind of the hook. Like all of a sudden, there's something about when we say the phrase at the start of a movie or something based on a true story. All of a sudden, you're kind of like, oh. And here, there's something about the fact that he fought Rocky Marciano that all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, this is real history. Like it's weaving itself into my own sense of American history and stuff. So. I think it's important. I think it's a big part of it. But what I sort of like was that it didn't have clean ends to the narrative. The boxing part didn't work out perfectly for him. The love story didn't come to a nice, perfect conclusion. And that felt, even if my American audience self wanted some, music and a beautiful ending, it just kind of left it a little open and felt a little bit real in that sense towards the end.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that he does meet up with her again at all is a nice way to tie up the storyline. But, yeah, it doesn't turn out exactly perfectly.
Yeah, and the son's face in the final pages, like, I don't know, it felt differently to me. And now talking to you, I sort of want to look real quick. But the son's face in the first panels, right? So the panels on the first 2 pages of the book basically are repeated in the last 2 pages of the book. But to me, the emotion in the face of the boy at the first 2 is boredom, frustration, irritation because he didn't get to stay at the beach with his siblings and mother. And in the last couple panels, and maybe, tell me if I'm projecting too much into it, but in the last couple panels, there's a sense of sympathy in the boy's face. There's a sense of kind of sadness. There's a sense of surprise in one of them, like kind of this sort of like he doesn't know what to do for his father. But it does feel like the face of the son is very different in those last 2 pages. Maybe that's what the story's about, really, is that, I mean, not to be reductive, but that through this story, the boy was able to shift from this kind of anger and resentment to something more of sympathetic puzzlement and not quite sure how to handle his father.
Yeah, possibly. I don't know. The son's whole appearance looks somewhat different. So, like, they're in the car. This is after he's seen Leia again. And they drive off the road because his father starts crying. And then, in both versions, the look of boredom is gone. But the way he's looking at his father is different. I don't know. I'm not sure how I would describe the first one. It's kind of like, what's going on? Where the second one, yeah, maybe it does have a bit more sympathy in it.
At least in the final page, the first panel and the third panel. The first panel in particular, to me, looks sort of like he doesn't know what to do, but he feels bad for his father.
Mm-hmm.
The third panel has maybe adds to that a touch of surprise or kind of, the eyes open up and the lines around the eyes open up. Those two panels seem to be a shift.
Mm-hmm.
But he does, now that you mention it, the character does look a little different entirely. He looks younger
Yes.
in the book.
In the beginning, yeah.
Yeah. Like years younger.
Yes.
The story had a big toll on him.
Yeah, definitely. The second version, looks at least 5 years older.
They were on the side of the road for quite a while.
Yeah, I expect at the end to say it's 1968.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Anything else we need to say?
I don't think so. I think I enjoyed it, but it didn't blow me away. If blow me away means it kind of did something new. I like the art. I like this type of art, and I liked the way the art was handled. I liked the structure of the story. It kind of did more or less what I expected, with obviously some details and some differences and stuff like that. But I kind of, when I first started reading it, I kind of had a feeling for the story, and that was what unfolded.
Right. Yeah, we were saying before we started that it was kind of what we expected, but done well. But yeah, I mean, we knew kind of what it was going in. It says right on the cover, the true story of Holocaust survivor Harry Haft, and it's called The Boxer. So you kind of get what the arc of the story is going to be.
Yeah, I would almost be interested. I mean, part of my interest was when I started reading about the artist and I finished reading the comic, is to take all of his work and put them kind of side by side and see why he's picking the type of characters that he's picking. All of them seem slightly marginalized. All of them seem to not garner a lot of popular sympathy, at least not initially. And it seems like the artist is interested in that kind of a character, marginalized by a particular society, either because they're an immigrant or, the Holocaust survivor, or in his case, both. And not terribly sympathetic for some of those reasons. In this case, because he's a bit brutal. The character is violent and brutal in his own right, and sort of just not pleasant, except in those moments when he's with Leia. But the artist seems really drawn to that. I'd be interested in kind of looking at the artist's overall work and wondering then how, in hindsight, that would illuminate aspects of this character in The Boxer, and why he selected this character and really was drawn to the character. In one interview, he says he really didn't think the story would work, but then after some months or years, the story wouldn't leave him. He just couldn't let it go, so he kind of felt he had to write about it. That was interesting.
Well, I'm thinking about I See a Darkness, the Johnny Cash one. The common thread, I think, between the two of them is someone who experienced tragedy at a young age and how they overcame that. I mean, Cash's brother died, as I recall. I don't remember how he died now. But there were several pretty bad experiences that he went through in his childhood. And he was kind of battling those demons in his adulthood too, after he became famous. So there's a common thread there, I think.
And the other two things that crossed my mind, just one is that it's a German artist that's doing this comic, and I think the more recent generations of Germans have a certain awareness of the Holocaust and what they're trying to understand through the Holocaust. That's one piece of this. And Europe right now is dealing with a lot of immigration issues. And so, the number of immigrants that this artist has chosen to focus on, I just wonder if that's in the background as well, because I know Northwestern Europe is dealing with so many kind of, the United States has it too, in the political rhetoric and everything else about immigrants. There's a way in which he's taking an unsympathetic immigrant character and giving us a look inside of a world that we might not often see. I appreciated that. I did like that quality to it.
Right. Yeah, this came out a couple of years ago, but still, I mean, I think the immigration thing's been going on in Europe for a while.
Yeah.
So it's not like it just started this year.
Right.
Okay, great. All right, so, yeah, I think I would recommend this.
Yeah, I would too.
The Boxer, the true story of Holocaust survivor Harry Haft, is published by Self-Made Hero. Don't forget, if you're a patron contributing at least $3 a month, you can watch a video of our entire Skype conversation at patreon.com/deconcomics. There's also a short clip of it available on the Deconstructing Comics YouTube channel. Deconstructing Comics is on YouTube, as well as Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, and Patreon. All our social media links can be found on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. Also, please give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. If you're interested in sponsoring this podcast or sending some feedback, write to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. Our theme is from bensound.com. This coming Thursday on To the Bat Polls, Paul and I look at Adam West's autobiography, Back to the Batcave, including his approach to the show, his misunderstanding of the word camp, and just how trustworthy some of his recollection is. Or is it spin? Look up To the Bat Polls wherever you find your podcasts, or at tothebatpolls.libsyn.com. Then next Monday, if you're an artist, at some point you've probably used photo reference. Many of the pros do it, but sometimes they overdo it. I'll be talking with Buddy Scalera, who just re-released the first volume in his series of photo reference books, and also with Stephen Bissett from the Center for Cartoon Studies. What are the right and wrong ways to use photo reference? We'll try to get much more than a snapshot of this issue next week. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.